From that day on, natural philosophy and especially chemistry became my sole occupation. I read books on these subjects with great excitement since they were filled with the genius of modern researchers. I attended every relevant lecture and cultivated the friendship of other men of science. I even found a great deal of sound advice and useful information in Mr. Krempe, combined, it's true, with a repulsive appearance and manners, but no less valuable for that reason. But in Mr. Waldman, I had found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by extremism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished any thought of pretension. In 1,000 ways, he opened up to me the path of knowledge and made the most obscure inquiries clear and easy to understand. At first, my efforts were frequently changing and uncertain. They gained direction as I persevered and soon became so intense and interesting that the stars often disappeared in the morning light while I was still working away in my laboratory. Since I applied myself with such intensity, as you can imagine, I progressed quite quickly. My determination was indeed the awe of the students and my proficiency that of the masters. With a sly smile, Professor Krempe often asked me how Cornelius Agrippa was, while Mr. Waldman expressed the most sincere praise of my progress. 2 years passed by, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was committed heart and soul to the pursuit of certain discoveries I hoped to make. Only those who have experienced them firsthand can understand the attractions of science. In other studies, you can only go as far as others have gone, and then there's nothing left to learn. But in the pursuit of science, there's always room for discovery and wonder. A mind of moderate ability that focuses intensely on a particular field of study will inevitably become proficient in that subject. And I, who was completely wrapped up in trying to accomplish a single objective, improved so quickly that after only 2 years, I made improvements to certain chemical instruments that earned me the respect and admiration of the entire university. Now that I knew as much about the theory and practice of natural philosophy as any of the professors at Ingolstadt, studying there was no longer of any use to me. I was thinking of returning to my friends in my hometown when an incident happened that extended my stay. One of the phenomena which particularly attracted my attention was the nature of the human body and of any animal blessed with life. From where, I often asked myself, did the essence of life come? It was a bold question, which has always been considered a mystery, and yet how many amazing revelations are we on the brink of discovering if only our irrational fears didn't restrict our inquiries? I turned these ideas over and over in my mind and decided to dedicate my future efforts to specific branches of natural philosophy related to physiology. If I hadn't been motivated by an almost supernatural passion, my commitment to this study would have been disturbing and almost intolerable. For to examine the causes of life, we must first study death. At first, I studied the science of anatomy, but this in itself wasn't enough. I also needed to observe the natural decay of the human body. In my education, my father had taken great care to avoid impressing upon me any belief in supernatural horrors. I don't remember having ever trembled at a tale of superstition or being afraid of the possible appearance of a ghost. Darkness had no effect on my imagination, and to me, a churchyard was only a resting place for bodies deprived of life, which had lost all beauty and strength and were now just food for the worms. Now I was compelled to study the cause and progression of this decay, and so I was forced to spend my days and nights in crypts and slaughterhouses. My attention was focused on many subjects that were offensive to those with delicate sensibilities. Now I studied how the noble form of man was degraded and wasted. I witnessed how the rod of death followed the rosy cheek of life. I watched as only the worms inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minutiae of causation revealed in the change from life to death and from death to life. Then, suddenly, in the heart of all this darkness, a light broke upon me. It was a light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that even though I was almost dizzy with its immense potential, I was surprised that I alone among so many great men of science should be chosen to discover such an astonishing secret. Remember, I am not recording the ravings of a madman. What I had discovered was as certain and as true as the sun in the sky. Something miraculous might be its source, yet the stages of my discovery were very clear and predictable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I had finally succeeded in discovering the very source of life itself. No, more than this. I had discovered how to give life to lifeless matter. The astonishment I first experienced on making this discovery immediately gave way to delight and exhilaration. After so much time spent in intense study, to arrive so suddenly at the peak of my desires was the most deeply satisfying outcome I could imagine. But this discovery was so great and so overwhelming that all the steps that had so slowly led to it were instantly wiped away. Now I only saw the result. What the wisest men had desired and studied since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that it had appeared to me all at once like magic. The information I'd discovered helped me to better direct my efforts towards the object of my search, rather than directly revealing the secret itself. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead and found a passage to life, aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. I see by your eagerness and the wonder in your eyes, my friend, that you hope to learn the secret I know. That can never be. Be patient. Listen until the end of my story, and you will understand why I must keep that secret to myself. I will not lead you on, as careless and ambitious as I was, to your inevitable destruction and misery. Learn from me, if not from my words, then by my example, how dangerous the acquisition of knowledge can be. How much happier is the man who thinks of his hometown as the world than he who seeks to become greater than the limits of nature will allow. When I found, when I found such an astonishing power placed within my hands, I hesitated for a long time, wondering how I should use it. I possessed the ability to grant life, but to prepare a body for the reception of it, with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of unimaginable difficulty and massive effort. At first, I didn't know if I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one with simpler anatomy. But my imagination was far too excited by my first success to make me think of giving life to any animal less complex than man. At present, the raw materials I had access to seemed insufficient for such an undertaking, but I had no doubt that I would ultimately succeed. I prepared myself for any number of setbacks. My efforts might be constantly hindered, and my work might be imperfect. But when I thought about the improvements that take place every day in science and mechanics, I knew my present failures might lay the foundation for future successes. Nor was I willing to consider that the scope of my plan or its complexity was any obstacle to its accomplishment. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. As the small details of the various body parts slowed the speed of my work, I eventually decided, contrary to my original plan, to make the being gigantic in stature. That is, about 8 feet high and large in its proportions. After having made this decision and then spending several months collecting and arranging my materials, I began. No one can imagine the various feelings that hurled me forward like a hurricane in the enthusiasm of my first success. Life and death appeared to me as the ultimate barriers, which I would be the first to break through and flood our dark world with light. A new species of man would praise me as its creator and source. Countless happy and wonderful beings would owe their existence to me, and no father could deserve the gratitude of his children any more than I would deserve theirs. Following these ideas, I thought that if I could give life to inanimate matter, I might eventually be able to restore life where death had once sentenced the body to rot and decay. These thoughts sustained my spirits while I pursued my undertaking with relentless intensity. During my lengthy studies, my complexion had grown pale and my body had become weak from isolation and lack of exercise. Sometimes I failed on the very brink of certain discovery, but I still held fast to the hope of what the next day or even the next hour might bring. I alone possessed the most valuable secret of all mankind, and to this great hope I dedicated myself entirely. As I worked, only the moon looked down upon my midnight labors while I pursued nature to her hiding places with tireless interest. Who can imagine the horrors of my secret work as I dabbled in the unholy dark of the grave, or tortured the living animal to give life to lifeless clay. Now my limbs tremble and my eyes weep with the memory of what I did. But then an overwhelming and almost frantic impulse urged me onward. It seemed I had lost all soul or feeling for anything but this one pursuit. It was only occasionally, in a passing trance, that I understood what I was doing with a heightened sense of awareness. But as soon as its unnatural influence stopped affecting me, I would return to my old habits. At that time, I was collecting bones from graveyards and profanely disturbing the tremendous secrets of the human body. In a solitary room, more like a cell at the top of the house, separated from all the other rooms by a staircase and a gallery, I kept my filthy workshop of creation. My eyeballs almost leapt from their sockets as I attended to the grisly details of my work. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse provided me with most of my working materials, and very often my human nature turned away from my grim activities with a profound loathing. Despite this, I persevered, and I brought my work ever closer to a conclusion, urged on by an ambition which continually increased. The summer months passed by while I lost myself, heart and soul, in this one pursuit. It was the most beautiful season. Never before did the fields seem to produce a more plentiful harvest, or the vines more luxuriant wines, but my eyes were oblivious to the charms of nature. The same feelings that made me ignore the beautiful scenery all around me also made me forget those friends so many miles away that I hadn't seen in years. I knew my silence worried them, and I remembered all too well the words of my father. While you follow your dreams, I know you'll think of us with affection and will hear from you often. Please forgive me for thinking that if you fail to write, it probably means that you're neglecting your schoolwork too. So clearly, I knew how my father would feel. Still, I couldn't tear myself away from my work, which, however gruesome, had nevertheless taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. In other words, I wished to put off everything related to my feelings until my great objective, which consumed my every thought and action, should be completed. At that time, I thought it was unfair of my father to say that the neglect of my friends and family was due to some fault on my part. But now, looking back, I believe he was right to say that I wasn't entirely blameless. A human being in perfection should always try to maintain a calm and peaceful mind, and should never allow any passion to disturb the balance of his being. And no, I don't think the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If you study a subject that weakens your affections and destroys your taste for the simple pleasures of life, then that study is unnatural or not suited to the human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no one ever allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the peace of his family life, then Greece would have never been enslaved. Caesar would have spared his country. America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru would not have been destroyed. But I forget myself. I'm moralizing at the most interesting part of my story, and the expression on your face begs me to continue. In his letters, my father said nothing to reprimand me, and only implied that he was aware of my silence by asking more questions about my studies than ever before. Winter, spring, and summer went by while I conducted my experiments. But even though they had always delighted me, I didn't take the time to watch the spring blossoms appear or to see the leaves grow. That's how obsessed I was by my current occupation. That year's leaves withered away before my work was complete, but every day revealed how successful my work had been. Still, my enthusiasm was frustrated by a growing level of stress, and I looked more like someone doomed to slavery in the mines than an artist working at his chosen career. Every night I was overwhelmed by a slow fever, and I became a nervous wreck to an almost painful degree. Sometimes the fall of a leaf would startle me, and I avoided my fellow students as if I was guilty of some hidden crime. Occasionally I was shocked at the wreck I'd become, but the energy of my purpose kept me going. My work was nearing its conclusion, and I believed that exercise and relaxation would drive away any growing disease, so I promised myself both when my creation was complete.